to you from the mountains and the plain. The only conservative voices brave enough to push back. This is the Conservative Daily Podcast with Joe Otto.
That's what the Second Amendment was designed to do. If you're going to do something to nullify or take away my rights under the Constitution, come get it.
Max McGuire.
When you look at politicians on the left, they need to convince people that they are victims.
A resistance to the resistance. And now your hosts, Joe Otto and Max McGuire.
And welcome back to another edition of the Conservative Daily Podcast. As always, my name is Max McGuire.
And this is Joe Otto.
And today we're going to talk about the media, the so-called experts, the health officials, how they once again seem to be trying to scare us all into staying inside. Joe, we've talked about this on the podcast before, but the IHME, the Institute, what's it stand for? The Institute for Health, something, IHME, their projection was one of the projections that the government used to justify the lockdown, to justify the shelter-in-place orders. That was ridiculous. In the beginning, they suggested 2 million, 1 million deaths. It eventually started getting revised down as they realized that they were wrong. They settled in at like 65,000 deaths, 65 to 70. And now today, Joe, the IHME model now predicts by August, we will see 134,000 deaths. They have essentially doubled the projection overnight. It's crazy because when you actually dive into these projections, and we'll talk a little bit too about the so-called leaked document that the media has been running with for the past 24 hours that they claimed was a Trump administration document when it actually ended up being a private research study that had been submitted to the CDC, hadn't been vetted. When you see all of this stuff, the media, these modelers, the health officials, it really does seem like they're trying to scare people into staying inside. I just don't understand how anyone's giving them any credibility anymore.
That's what weak people do. Weak people push people, try to control people, right? Lie to people. When has the government ever been right? Like when have they told us anything that's been true? I mean, I can't remember a time that, dating back in modern history where we haven't been lied to.
Yeah.
I mean, they want to interview Fauci, right? Who is, by the way, if you just look at his record of who he's donated money to and things like that, he is closely connected to the Democrats, the deep state. And you can say that, Fauci is the most knowledgeable person who's a virologist or immunologist in the world. And I would tell you that's garbage. He's not, actually. He has worked in the same same organization since 1984. He's advised 6 presidents.
Yeah.
but he's also the one that has time and time again come under scrutiny for his leadership within the NIH community, right? So we literally are in a world right now where people who say that they're quote unquote educated, we don't fact check their character. We don't fact check them as people. Like, are they really good people? Are they good people?
Yeah.
And I would tell you that Fauci's not a good person, right? He lies a lot. He fits really well into the government narrative of how do we get rid of Trump? And you could say, Joe, it has nothing to do with Trump. And I would say you would have to be dumb in a closet with blindfolded with the music blaring for 2 decades and not recognize that there's an underlying thing happening within our country that frankly is, hey, what are you moving on the page there, Bubba? I can see it. I can literally see that.
Yeah. I know. I'm putting it up. This is.
Oh, you are?
These are stats. This is what the CDC put out. No, I put this up on.
It's too small.
I was just waiting for you to finish. Well, what do you want me to do? You want me to do that? I can make it bigger.
No.
These are stats. I'll just cover my face so everyone can see it. These are stats from the CDC. These were put out last week. These are stats from the CDC. So instead, the number that we've been seeing put out by the media, this 67,000, 68,000 number, this number has included a lot of deaths that technically haven't been classified as COVID-19. So what this graph I just put up shows is this is from the CDC's website. This is actually the honest death certificate statistics. So this shows people who have passed away and their death has been classified as COVID-19 as of May 1st. It might have changed recently, but on May 1st, this data showed that 37,308 people had died from COVID-19 deaths. Now, what this is a very honest graph, because what it then does is it then points to pneumonia deaths, which on May 1st was 64,382, and then it lists deaths with pneumonia, influenza, or COVID-19 at 90,165. So this is incredibly honest, because what we've seen from the media and states, it's also the states and the hospitals, because they have a financial incentive to inflate the numbers as much as possible. What we've seen them classify people as COVID-19 deaths when they didn't have COVID-19. I mean, Project Veritas put out a very good video talking with people who were in charge of funeral homes and how families have challenged death certificate certifications that their family member died of COVID-19, and they've won. Autopsies showed they didn't have COVID-19. So we know that people are being classified as a COVID death when they didn't have COVID-19. But Joe, you've mentioned on the podcast before that the flu didn't take a holiday. All the other respiratory diseases that cause pneumonia didn't take a holiday.
No, it didn't take a holiday.
We've been led to believe that everyone who's died with flu-related symptoms, and again, that's not even just people who have died from the flu. These are people who died and had flu symptoms at the same time. People who have died of a heart attack are being classified as a COVID-19 death. People who have died in car crashes have been classified as COVID-19 deaths. I guess presumably blaming the sneeze on the car crash. I don't know. But we've seen this across the board. These numbers, which I'm going to turn off on the screen in a little bit, these numbers show the real statistics, which is what we know. 37,000 have been confirmed COVID. Pneumonia has been listed as the cause for 64,000. And the combination of pneumonia, influenza, or COVID-19 has been listed as 90,000. So it's interesting, because when you look at the modeling suggesting that there's going to be 143,000 deaths, if you go by that broad statistic of everyone who's died from confirmed COVID, pneumonia, or flu symptoms, we're already well on our way there, right? That's how you get to that number. You don't get to that number with the actual COVID death of 37,000. You can't get there. Right?
No, you can't get there at all.
The only way you get there is by including statistics of people who've died who have not been confirmed to have COVID-19. Now, some of that is error. I get that. Some people have been listed as being killed by COVID-19 out of error, and humans will always make errors. But there is an incentive from states who want to make the caseload look higher, so they'll get more federal funding, from hospitals who have a financial incentive to have COVID patients. There is an incentive. Now, I like to believe that people wouldn't cook the books for their own monetary gain.
But we know they would.
Ambitions, but
we know they would.
You can't take it out of the equation.
Yeah. So listen, we want to act as if good people want to act as if there's a lot of good people in positions of authority, and the reality of it is that's not true.
Yeah, it's not. So
not true.
Let's see if we can get some callers. Hopefully we can get a couple callers in today. Let us know, call in and let us know what you think about all this. Do you trust the modeling? Do you trust the health officials, the hospitals? Do you trust that they're reporting the real numbers? Call in and let us know toll free at 888-441-1121, and we'll get you on the air. It's heartbreaking. The people who have passed away, people who have gotten sick. But now we're even seeing the World Health Organization, which I don't believe a thing they say, right? In January, they claimed that there was no person-to-person transmission for the disease, which was a complete lie. But now the World Health Organization is saying, well, maybe the lockdown isn't necessary. Maybe the lockdown was the bad decision. It's just these health officials, when they're wrong, they just revise the statistics to make it look like they're right. And when they're really wrong, they just change their mind, say, oh, no, well, this is what the data is showing now. The whole thing's a crock. Right? The virus is real. People are getting sick. People are unfortunately passing away. But everywhere in between there and the news media reports, the numbers are being massaged. They're being changed. They're being manipulated. I mean, CNN put an infographic up the other day claiming that we were approaching 3 million fatalities. That's just false, right? It's just completely false. So these numbers are being massaged by people who have a either monetary or political impetus behind it, and it's obvious, because you can't get to the modeling if you use the real numbers. It's impossible.
No, and you can't get to the real numbers, and right. I want to be really clear. They have to, on the CDC site, report actual facts.
Yeah.
right? So it could be a huge. So they can say whatever they want in the real world, right? They can say that this is all the deaths from COVID. There is actually government regulation that can hold people responsible for publishing something that's not accurate.
Yeah.
So the CDC site has to be accurate, but nobody refers back to the CDC site. And so when they've been asked, there's been people who've been asked why is there a discrepancy between the CDC site and what the news are reporting or others are reporting? And both times that it's actually been asked and answered, they said, I don't know. I suppose that the numbers just haven't caught up to them yet.
That's not.
They literally said the same thing, but the reality of it is that as of date on the CDC site actually reports it as of that date. Yeah. And if any changes are made, they're required to publish that a change was made inside of their.
Yeah, and we all know that this number listed on the CDC site of actually coded COVID-19 deaths of 37,308, and again that was as of May 1st. I'm sure it has changed a little bit since then. That number obviously is not the total number. There are people who have died from COVID-19 who didn't get the test, who have been misclassified, right? But this idea that everyone who has died from pneumonia or influenza-like symptoms, that they're automatically classified as COVID-19, it's illogical. It's illogical, and yet that's what we've let these health officials, government officials do. We've let them presume that if you died with flu symptoms, then the COVID-19 killed you. I mean, it's crazy stuff. And I mean, Ben Shapiro got a lot of grief last week when he was talking about how a lot of the people, they're saying now between 20 and 50% of COVID-19 fatalities are from nursing homes, which is heartbreaking, absolutely heartbreaking. But Ben Shapiro made the comment, and he got slammed in the media for it. He made the comment of, did we just destroy the economy basically to save 80-year-olds, which no one wants anyone to die. But considering the fact that almost everyone who dies from this disease is either of a significant age, over 65 or in their 80s or 90s, or they have underlying comorbidities, the really frightening thing is when all is said and done, we're going to look at this and there's going to be a lot of sick people who died. But to destroy the economy for that, to scare us all into staying inside, it doesn't make sense anymore. And Joe, the new models that they're coming out, basically saying we're going to have hundreds of thousands of deaths. The modelers admit that they don't take social distancing into account, that they assume everyone has a comorbidity or who's elderly will just start going outside again, going back to their old ways. No, you've mentioned in the past, the solution is to reopen the economy and quarantine the people who are vulnerable, the people who are sick, who are already sick, or the people who are of an advanced age, right? I don't give any credence to a model that says hundreds of thousands of people will die if the model assumes that 90-year-olds are going to start going to the movie theaters again, right? It just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense if you presume that people are just going to, like, there's no reason to believe that the elderly are going to start like bumping elbows in a movie theater. It's stupid. Well,
when we had I'll talk about the protest that we had. Like 400 people showed up. We had an open carry issue, a lot of yada yada yada, right? So we had people who were well into their 70s that showed up for the event, and we would just ask them the questions like, why are you? I had to ask people questions like, why'd you come out and not wear a mask? And they go, I've lasted 70 years, right? I'm pretty healthy. I take care of myself, right? I want to be able to choose. Yeah. So I think that, that they're trying to scare people into this idea that the government is looking out for them and that they need to stay inside and watch the world burn around them, right? Because we need to save every life. Every life matters, right? By the way, while we still commit abortion everywhere and watch people die of things that are unintended consequences. So I think that at some point we're going to have to just admit that the government they lie about everything, that they literally are. They don't have the ability to tell us the truth, and the media sure doesn't have the ability to tell us the truth. They're storytellers. So if we admit both of those things, then why don't the people that are actually have comorbidity issues and or are advanced in age, and they want to protect themselves, I really want you to go through the steps of saying, hey, here's my sign outside, leave the food at the front door, Lysol things, cook your own food, get food delivery, do all those things, right?
Yeah.
So that's 1% of our population in one regard, and probably another 10% of the population in the other regard. And the other 89% of the people, go out and do what you got to do.
Yeah.
Right?
There was a poll that just came out that showed the vast majority of Republicans support reopening the economy and protecting people who are vulnerable. And when they polled the Democrats, the vast majority of Democrats supported everyone staying at home. I mean, it's such a night and day difference.
Because they're weak. They're weak.
I don't know if it's weak. I don't know if it's weakness. I don't know if it's weakness or if it's just they're much more inclined to accept a government check and just live off of that. I mean, this is the same party. This is the same party.
I was just being funny, Max. I was being funny.
Yeah, this is the same party that during the actual debates, the nomination debates, actually debated the idea of a universal basic income. This idea of you should get a government check every month just because you exist. That was already a mainstream Democrat position. So I'm not all that surprised that those same people want to use this as the opportunity to have a UBI, universal basic income. I hate using that acronym UBI. It sounds like a sexually transmitted disease. But it's shocking, just the disparity in how Republicans, conservatives want to open up the economy, get back to work, and Democrats are saying no, we can't do it. It's too soon. It's actually depressing because you realize that this country became what it is. This country is what it is, not because of the far left. We are what we are in spite of the far left. If you're talking about the major political party in this country, the vast majority are perfectly content with letting the economy burn and just sitting at home and collecting a check. They did not contribute to this economy, right? We were able to produce what we produced in spite of them, not because of them. And to me, it's incredibly depressing.
Yeah. So, by the way, I want to go back. I said they're weak. I was using the argument that everyone says that, hey, you're weak. I think that it's not that people are weak, that they're fearful, right? And they're fearful of the unknown. And every argument I get into with someone who's fearful is, well, what if the sky falls? What if this kills everybody? Yeah. And I was like, well, statistically speaking, it's not killing everybody. And there's 330 million people in the world, and the chances of you dying of this are less than 0.5%. So, if you run around with your head cut off and saying that, hey, I'm going to die because I have asthma, actually, there's only 2 cases of people that died having asthma as the underlying root issue, immunity issue in the entire country.
Well, by the way, it might not have been listed as it, but a lot of people have died and have had asthma. It's just whether or not the asthma itself is what caused them to die. Plenty of people have asthma. It's just whether or not that's what's listed. I mean, we're talking about the actual codes that this being used in the CDC reporting. Like COVID-19, it's classified as U07.1. If you have an influenza symptom, it's categorized either as J09 or J11. Right? There's all these codes. Someone can have asthma, but if it's not coded as an asthma death, then it won't show up in the data. And that's why it's hard to look at numbers like that and just assume that that's the total number, because there's plenty of people who have asthma, but maybe they also have heart disease, right? And they had a heart attack, and it was categorized as a COVID-19 caused heart attack. It all depends on what the doctor at the time puts down. But there are more people in the country who have died from COVID-19 than just 2 with asthma.
Okay, so 2 that listed it as a contributing factor. There's only 2. I just checked again. 2 still 2, right? But maybe some other people had asthma, but that's like saying that, that I had, I don't know, I had foot surgery and my foot hurt and I got an infection in my foot, but then I caught a cold and then I died of the cold when actually gangrene in my foot killed me. In other words, I'm sure that they contribute to each other, right? I'm sure everything contributes to it, to dying of COVID-19. But what I'm saying is that you can't look at this and say, I have asthma, I can't go out, I got to stay away from this virus, because we have to conflate everything together, right? At some point, and we have to be able to say that everyone in the country is going to get COVID-19. you are not going to be able to escape it. You can't, right? You can't escape the flu, right? They have a flu vaccine, and still 60 to 80,000 people every year die of the flu. And they have a vaccine, and they have 2 vaccines, one for influenza A, one for influenza B. And if influenza C decides to come in, it's going to kill people, right? Or if it's a crapshoot on which side of the strain you actually get, and you might get the other side of it. So you're trying to protect and bubble wrap people, which is a common theme amongst Democrats, is that they want to bubble wrap people. They want to be overly this protectionism that's actually being pushed out there. It's actually making us weak as a country, right? And so if we don't bring all the information together and start making better decisions on reality, we're going to continue to let people pipe up to saying staying home saves lives. Staying home does not save lives. It doesn't save lives.
So there's 2 different ideas here. If everyone stays home and no one interacts with anyone else,
they'll get sick anyway of other things.
Well, they might get sick of other things, but when it comes to COVID-19, not interacting with other people will undoubtedly prevent the disease from spreading. The question is whether it's worth it, whether it's completely effective of stopping the disease from spreading, and whether it's worth it when you compare it to all of the other complications that arise from shutting down the economy and forcing everyone to stay at home. In past episodes on the podcast, we talked about how the suicide rate has already started climbing, people being locked at home, how domestic violence has started going up, how child abuse reports have started going up because people have been forced into their homes. They're not allowed to go outside. The people who are already violent are taking it out on their family members. I mean, there are complications that arise. There are serious ramifications to shutting the economy down. And that's beyond just the actual economic catastrophe of all this, right? We know that if everyone stops interacting with other people, a virus that spreads person to person will not spread. The question is it worth it, taking into account all of the other ramifications from that lockdown policy? And the fact that what we see in places like Sweden, where they're approaching herd immunity, which is the idea that yes, people have died, but the idea they've locked the country down, right? People have still died, but unlike Sweden, we all don't have the antibodies to protect us. Sweden, right. Yes, they had fatalities, but because they kept their country open, everyone who could get the disease did get it or is getting it. They are asymptomatic, and now they have the antibodies, which presumably they don't have the concrete evidence that it will do it, but presumably having antibodies will at least prevent you from getting the disease again. So we've locked down our country. People have still died from it. People are still dying from it. And instead of letting people get the disease and develop the antibodies, now we're all just fair game for the virus. It's so aggravating because anyone with a basic understanding of biology could have told you this at the start, but these so-called experts demanded that we lock the entire country down. And now those same experts are saying, oops, we got it wrong, do the opposite. And oh, by the way, if we do the opposite, 100,000 more people are going to die. It's so infuriating because you realize that they're playing games with people's lives. These decisions are not being made. These so-called experts are recommending things. It's so frustrating. It's so frustrating because you see what's happening to people, and you see what's happening to business owners, to businesses, to people losing their grandparents. And now the only answer we're getting from the health officials is, oops, we got it wrong, but now we're going to get it right. It's exhausting. It's exhausting, Joe.
It's exhausting because none of them are math people. Like, I'm a math guy, right? I believe in math. I love math. I use math in everything that I do. I build algorithms. I can tell you what the likelihood of you walking across the street and knocking your head against the curb and dying, right? Weird stuff that I think about that others don't, right? I think about coefficients and like coefficients of drag and things like my gas mileage and what I could do with my car. Now, I don't act upon those things, thank goodness, or that would make me weird. But I do think about these things, and I have a tendency to jump into statistics and do a lot of data research, and then take that data and I correlate it to other things, and then I come up with probability, what I call the PPV values.
Yeah, we don't have to dive too, Joe. We're hemorrhaging viewers again. We're hemorrhaging viewers again.
No, we're not.
No one wants to listen to statistics.
Yes, they do.
Show.
Yeah, stop it. I need to tell them this, right? So, but I love math, right? And I've tried everything. I've tried using everything that Fauci says. I've tried using everything that other people in the media have said, that have come out and said, hey, 2 million people are going to die, 200,000. This is going to be our Pearl Harbor moment. And none of it is mathematically possible. So they're using hyperbole and this hysteria factor to drive to what does not exist. It's a boogeyman. And by the way, there are political groups that use boogeymen all the time. Yeah. They use it all the time. They use it when they actually cry racism. They use it when they cry bigotry. They use it when they cry homophobia, right? Or xenophobia. Sorry, COVID got me. So they use those things though, right? And now this is just another one of those examples that they can use this as a tool of fear. Yeah. And then you have the media, and you have the technology, right? So the social media networks that are weaponizing their technology to only feed us one narrative. Everything that they want to do, they're doing, right? And then they have all these people that are coming out saying, "Hey, listen, I'm a Democrat, doctor, virologist, immunologist. I work over here, and what you're saying is absolutely false." And then you get places like Reuters that comes out and says, "Oh, that virologist doesn't know what he's talking about. Yeah. Oh, that doctor, well, so he went to a Class B school. It's a state school. So he's not that bright. His books were lighter. They had less information in them. So we're not actually going to say that that's partially false." Or a better one is that I just got, was that Reuters said that there's a partially, quote unquote, partially false post that went up in Facebook, right? And the partially false part was if you wear a mask for too long, because that's what it said. If you wear a mask for too long, it can actually have an adverse effect on your health because of CO2, right? Too much CO2. And so it literally picks apart an article saying it's partially false because it doesn't actually spell out how many hours you'd have to wear the mask.
Yeah. It's like if you sleep with a pillow on top of your face, you could suffocate. Right. Well, that's not technically true because you don't take into account how deep the breathing is. Yes, if you put cloth next to your mouth and you breathe out and in too much, you could harm your health. I mean, that's the same reason that the states and counties and cities that are requiring people to make wear masks have carve-outs, exceptions for people with certain diseases, because wearing a mask, if you have those underlying conditions, can actually pose a bigger threat to you. Like shock, you could suffocate yourself if you cover your mouth. But the fact that they're fact-checking that as if it's some crazy lie, it's ludicrous.
So this is actually what they say. The claim lists different percentages of CO2 in air and the symptoms associated with inhaling each. The claim does not clarify what is meant by wearing a mask continually, quote unquote, and whether this suggests a certain number of hours at the time or entire days, like as in people are wearing it to bed, right? Yeah. It also does not specify the type of mask. Why don't you just admit the fact that if you wear a mask for too long, it can kill you?
Yeah.
How about that? That's what the article said. Yeah, but you have Reuters that literally has the fact check that can come out. I mean, it's all a shill game, man. I'm telling you. The whole thing pisses me off because we're weaponizing technology against people to get them to think one way and one way only. And we say that we're for, taking care and preserving life, right? Well, out the back door, we're killing babies with abortion, number one. And number two, we're letting people die of the unintended consequences at a rate 4 times that of COVID.
Yeah, and I'm done. Well, we need to take a real quick break, and when we come back, we're going to keep talking about this. So if you want to call in and join the conversation, please do. Call toll-free at 888-441-1121, and we will be right back.
Ronald Reagan famously said that our freedoms are never more than a generation away from extinction. Conservative Daily exists to make sure that never happens. With our community of 700,000 members, we fight every day to hold Congress's feet to the fire and stop them from surrendering our rights and freedoms. The fight to take this country back is not over. Please join our movement right now by going to conservative-daily.com and clicking the subscribe button to sign up for our free call to action newsletters. We have a chance to save this country, but only if we all work together. Again, this is conservative-daily.com, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button at the top.
Well, we're back. We are talking here on the Conservative Daily podcast. We are talking about the modeling, the numbers that are being fed to us by the so-called experts, the mainstream media, and their attempt to scare us into staying inside. I want to play this cut, Joe, because this was what Donald Trump was asked earlier today as he was on his way to an event. He was asked why he is not going to let Dr. Fauci testify before the House, and he had a very honest response. Let's go to cut one.
Because the House is a setup. The House is a bunch of Trump haters. They put every Trump hater on the committee, the same old stuff. They frankly want our situation to be unsuccessful, which means death. And our situation is going to be very successful. The House has put on a committee, an oversight committee of Maxine Waters and Maloney and the same people. And it's just a setup. But Dr. Fauci will be testifying in front of the Senate, and he looks forward to doing that. But the House, I will tell you, the House, they should be ashamed of themselves. And frankly, the Democrats should be ashamed, because they don't want us to succeed. They want us to fail so they can win an election, which they're not going to win. But they want us to think of it. They do everything they can to make things as bad as possible.
Yeah, so Joe, this is Trump in Trump form calling the left out. I mean, it's hard to say that the left cared about this when Trump warned Congress during a State of the Union address that coronavirus was a threat. And immediately after, Nancy Pelosi ripped up the speech and said it was nothing but a manifesto of lies, right? On the same day that the Senate was basically debating whether to remove Trump from office, that's when Donald Trump announced that the China ban was in effect, right? On the same day that patient zero entered the United States, Nancy Pelosi was handing out commemorative pens to celebrate the impeachment going from the House to the Senate. I feel like I'm taking crazy pills here, because while the president's actually working to try and protect the American people, not only are the Democrats blocking and delaying the aid to try and get their own pet project, but they're actually trying to interfere. I would love to see what someone like Adam Schiff is doing to help the country. I would love to see what Nancy Pelosi is doing to help the country, but they aren't doing anything. You'd search for a lifetime to try and find that evidence. It's so frustrating, because Joe, when Congress investigated the Pearl Harbor attacks, the idea they were investigating whether or not the Roosevelt administration had foreknowledge of the attack. They waited until after World War II to do it. Right? The 9/11 Commission didn't start its work until over a year after the 9/11 attacks. Here in Congress, we have an oversight committee already being set up to investigate a government response in real time as it's going on, right? They're not trying to just get to the truth. They're trying to dig up more dirt that they can use to try and hurt the president, defeat the president come November. And it's obvious.
Because it's a war on the American people. It's a war on the American people. Hey, let's go back to what you said before about universal income.
Sure.
What is it called?
Universal basic income, UBI.
UBI. Yeah. I'm not going to tell you what it sounds like. But
yeah, I know. It sounds like a venereal disease.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I wasn't going to say that, but okay. I'll go there. Okay. So it says, by the way, Kristen says you should talk to a doctor and a person who does coding to understand how the coding works. Some codes are symptoms and some codes are illnesses, diseases, and conditions. So maybe we should do that, Max. Maybe we should dig into the data on that. Well, let's get back to the UBI, right? So I want to trace. So if you trace back the origins of this virus, right, the coronavirus, it comes from China, right, from Wuhan, China.
Well, it comes from China.
China. Okay, so it comes from China. So, but if you trace back universal basic income, okay, so take that $2,000. Let's just trace it back to the government. Goes through the government. Government receives it. They receive it from taxpayer. Oh my gosh!
Well, not even necessarily.
What just happened here?
They don't have that money right now. The government, they just announced that the government is actually going to be taking in another $3 trillion in debt. So it's great to say it's coming from the taxpayer, but it isn't even at this point. The government doesn't have this kind of money. It's being piled on as debt. But keep going.
So, but ultimately, okay, let's do it your way then. So it goes right back to the taxpayer.
At some point, someone has to pay for it. Yeah.
And then everybody has a credit card, right? And your credit card, if you look at it right now, if they send you a statement, is about 300 per person, about $381,000 per person, right? That's your taxable deal. That, by the way, it just keeps growing. So no matter what you pay towards it, it'll go from 381 to 450 to 500 to 1 million. So your worth in contribution to the government, 381,000, because you have to pay down that debt and you have to stay in the workforce. So if they start just giving people free money and they're not paying that credit card back, I mean, you do the math.
Yeah.
We live in a marketplace where our currency system will collapse, right? So let's talk about math. If our currency system collapses, because we're based on a global currency system, right? The global currency system will collapse. And then everybody goes, well, I'll just buy gold. Well, see, here's the thing. If we go back in history 2,000 years, the commodity, do you know what the commodities were 2,000 years ago?
No, I don't study pre-Jesus Christ commodities markets.
Okay. The commodity was the commodity, the currency was things, right?
Yeah,
cows
sure,
and crops and right.
Well, I mean, they still had actual like precious metal coinage, but yeah,
they did.
It was a lot of bartering. Yeah.
Right. But a lot of bartering. So that the monetary part represented a smaller fraction of it, right? And it was typically some sort of precious like gold, right? But when you get to a point where you've broken down society and taken away the ability for people to buy things, the currency systems, it's going to revert back to the things that are most precious to people, and that is the ability to live. So food, right? And resources, natural resources like gas and things like that. So we're closely coming up against, in my opinion, we're getting to the place where our currency, not just here but globally, doesn't mean anything. It's a Ponzi scheme, just layering things on. So if we don't have a debt jubilee and or reset some things, we're never going to get out of this. And the politicians, by the way, they don't care, because the politicians are always at the top. They're always at the top of the pyramid. No matter what you say, they are the least affected by anything that could happen. And the people above them that are even least affected, less than they are the 1%ers or the billionaires of the world. Like they're even less affected.
Yeah, you don't even need to go that far back though. Like if you look at like interwar Germany, the period between World War I and World War II, they had such high hyperinflation that the money that they had was absolutely worthless. You needed a wheelbarrow full of Deutschmarks to get a loaf of bread. So you had people actually using cash to heat their homes. You had them lining their walls with cash as wallpaper for insulation. You had kids using bundles of cash as like building blocks. It meant nothing, right? And you're right. In a situation like that where it's dire economic realities, people aren't worried about diamonds. People aren't worried about silver or gold, though there are technical needs for those precious metals with like electronics and such. People aren't going to be going out to buy engagement rings when they're worried about how they're going to feed their families. So you're right in that sense that in this kind of economic collapse, which is this one's completely man-made, the priorities change. Right? People are worried about feeding their families. They're not worried about whether the diamond ring on their finger is bigger than their neighbor's, right? It's just completely different priorities.
Right. Well, I think that at this point, if we don't start at some point looking at the economic impacts of this and stop saying that, hey, we're going to save lives, we're going to see a man-made tsunami of death. Right. And it's not going to have anything to do with this virus. It's going to have to do with all the consequences of the virus. And by the way, do you know what the Democrats are going to do? They're literally going to weaponize it again and say they're going to rewrite history, this revisionist deal, and say, oh, it's all their fault. Because that's what they've done up to this point, is that they lie. Because we need to get back to the part again, let me say it again, the media lies and politicians lie and government workers lie and they 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 lie.
Yeah.
They don't stop lying.
So I know that you have to leave soon. You have to leave a little early. So I want to pose this question. You talked about a debt jubilee, debt holiday. There's a lot of talk now about holding China accountable because the documents that were just released, there's some reporting with like Five Eyes intelligence agencies, which are allies like Britain, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and the like. There's reporting now that China not only might have caused this outbreak, but they deliberately withheld evidence. They forced doctors and labs to destroy samples, refused to give samples of the virus to foreign labs to work on a vaccine, right? Covered it up, lied, and said that you couldn't transmit person to person. The evidence is overwhelming that China, if they didn't actually cause this outbreak, absolutely made it worse by lying to the world about the virus. What do you think should happen to China? Because I completely agree, this debt is unsustainable, and China owns a significant portion of our debt. What should be done to China? Because this idea, they're viewing this as the new Chinese century, that they're going to use the next 100 years. They're going to become the world superpower from this. They actually think they're going to be able to benefit from this. What should happen to China when all is said and done?
We should sue them, right? Which won't mean anything, just a bunch of politicians playing in a kangaroo court. But then we should just cancel debt, start taking the bonds and the things. And you'd say, well, that would destabilize the world. What is happening right now? I'm just curious.
The challenge is that that's unconstitutional. The Constitution actually says you're not allowed to cancel debt. So it would have to get you'd have to sue them. We'd either need a constitutional amendment, or you need to basically grind them into the dust and basically say, okay, if we're going to have an economic reset, we're going to have a reset. No one can do business in China, right? If you're bringing goods into the United States from China, you're getting hit with massive tariffs. There are ways that we could defeat China, throw China back into the Stone Age, right? There are ways we could do it economically, and by just simply forcing companies to look elsewhere, right? China is the producer for our economy, and there's plenty of other countries that would love it. But I think it'd be challenging. I mean, you could do it. You could change the Constitution. What other ways do you think that we could hold China accountable other than just like a lawsuit, which they wouldn't even pay attention to?
Stop buying from them. I mean, and that's not going to be real. That won't be popular with certain people, but just stop buying things from China. You would say, well, we buy everything. Our cars are made in China. Okay, stop doing it.
Yeah.
Well, things will become more expensive. No, they won't, because most of the cheap crap that comes out of China anyway goes from somebody's shelf to your closet to your trash can.
Yeah.
All inside of a year. Inside of 3 months. Are you kidding me? They make cheap crap. And by the way, Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, I can go down the line, Thailand. These are all places, by the way, that we can start shifting our buying habits to, that have cheaper labor, right, and quality products.
And they're much more supportive of the United States. Like you talk to someone in the Philippines, they love the United States. They love the United States of America. They would love for the opportunity to replace China as a production powerhouse. Even Vietnam, even with our history with Vietnam, the Vietnamese are much more friendly to the United States today than China is. So yeah, I mean, that's one way to do it. It would take, I don't think it would happen organically. I don't think you'd be able to have people just like have an anti-China movement. You'd have to have some kind of legislation come down to disincentivize multinational corporations from importing products into the United States made in China. There'd have to be something, and it would be very painful. It would be very, very painful, because you're talking about in the short term, prices would skyrocket for a lot of basic things like computers, electronics would go way, way up, right? Medical equipment would go way, way up. But it just shows how reliant we've been on China. And I know you have to go, so I'll wrap it up after this. But there's a Department of Homeland Security report that's indicating that one of the reasons that China actually hid the virus, tried to hide it from the world, is to give them extra time to stockpile medical equipment and personal protective gear, to try and get all of the masks, all of the gowns and whatnot themselves, so they could take care of their own people and turn a profit selling it to the rest of the world. If that doesn't tell you how disgustingly reliant we've become on China with our supply chains and everything, this should be a wake-up call. This should be a wake-up call for all Americans, regardless of your political persuasion, that we cannot rely on China for life-saving equipment. Forget about the tchotchkes that you find in the dollar store. We're talking about life-saving equipment. We can't rely on China, and it is a national security risk to have China anywhere near our supply chain.
I don't disagree with you, but I think we've become reliant. And by the way, we haven't even started talking about China's ownership of media outlets here in the U.S.
Yeah.
Their ownership of property, real estate in the U.S. I mean, there's a lot of things that we can do as a country to kind of take our country back, but it is going to have a nationalistic tone to it. And frankly, I'm for it. And you would say, Joe, that sounds really harsh. What's harsh is the fact that people are dying of suicide and getting adversely affected by domestic abuse and going hungry, the amount of mental abuse that people are going through, right, and anguish that they're going through as a result of this hysteria.
Yeah.
I think the media should be sued too. I think the people that put false reports out there and create this propaganda when it's all over should be sued. I think that immunity inside the government should go away completely. I don't think that the government should be immune from prosecution. I don't think that, I mean, it just is getting to a different level of things. I think that when they found the dossier or whatever for Flynn, that those people in the FBI, I think they should go to prison for the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
I think that the politicians that perpetuate things that aren't true, once it's found out to be not true, they should go to jail. They should not just be punitive in the fact that they were removed from office. If you lie, you're out. That's what I think should happen. It's really simple. You lied, you caused somebody to have to spend a bunch of money, you should go to jail. There should be real consequences in our country for people who do the things that they have done. I think that history is going to tell a different story, right? I think that these politicians have lied. I think that Governor Cuomo is a absolute raging piece of garbage. I think he is a terrible human being, right? And I think he's a terrible human being because he believes he can bark orders at us and treat us like dogs. That's what he believes.
Yeah, well, tell me how you really feel.
Yeah, well, that's how I feel. But I think that if we don't start waking up, which frankly, if we're just being perfectly honest, I think we are waking up. And I think people are now measuring, the consequences that will come from raising their hand and standing up against not, right?
Yeah.
And no other time in history has it been more important. No other time in history. I can go all the way back to the Revolutionary War. No other time in history was it as important to stand up as it is today. No other time in history. This is the most paradigm shifting, critical time in the history of our country, right? See, this is it.
Yeah.
We survived it once and we got our independence. We won't survive it again. And we'll lose everything that we've known if we don't start standing.
Well, I couldn't have said it better myself. That's going to be it for this edition of the Conservative Daily Podcast. Remember that you can download and subscribe to our podcast for free on the Google Play Store as well as Apple Podcasts. You can also find us on the Podbean app as well as conservative-daily.com/podcast. Please do subscribe. Please do comment. Let us know what you want us to cover. It really does help as we try to plan out these future episodes. So again, my name is Max McGuire.
This is Joe Otto.
And remember that the fight to take back our country isn't over, but the only way we win is if we all fight together.